Welcome to the Ultimate Music Teacher's Productivity and Profitability podcast. I'm your host, Glory St. Germain. Tune in to discover how you can unleash your teaching potential and turn your passion for music education into profit. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Ultimate Music Teacher's Productivity and Profitability podcast. I'm your host, Glory St. Germain, and today we have a special guest joining us, coming to us from the bustling streets of New York City. Brent Vaartstra is not just a professional jazz musician, but also an esteemed author, podcaster, jazz coach, and the director of the internationally acclaimed jazz education company, Learn Jazz Standards. I just can't wait to hear more. Through his innovative techniques and passion, Brent has transformed the way that many musicians approach jazz and turning the complex into the comprehensible. So excited. Thank you, Brent, and welcome to the show.
Lori, I am very excited to be on your podcast today. It's really a pleasure, and I can't thank you enough just for inviting me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It absolutely is. And I know music teachers are so often stuck in that classical world and think, oh, I don't know if I can do the jazz. So this is a perfect segue for them to be open to ideas and possibilities. And, just to kick things off, could you share a little bit with us on, what's the spark that kind of lights up that fire in you? And how did you get started in music lessons?
Well, that's an interesting question. Because we were kind of talking before we started recording that, music, it wasn't a huge emphasis in my family, really. I just I kind of took to it myself. I kind of got really super just interested in, all kinds of music. And, I'm a guitar player. So I got my first guitar, I think when I was 10 years old. My parents said, yeah, you know what, we'll pay for half of your guitar if you save up for the other half. That was a great, by the way, not music lesson, but a great life lesson. Anyways.
Yes.
Got my first guitar and I worked hard to get that thing, and I took it seriously, and I just started playing it. I had a private lesson teacher at first, but then he mysteriously disappeared, and not even the music store he worked at could find him. So, must have run off. And so I taught myself for a while. And, then as I moved on to, I don't know, maybe it was in high school, I started, taking lessons from different teachers. I got kind of interested in jazz, kind of fell into a group of, I found a local teacher who was just, it just kind of changed my world, just a die-hard jazz, and his students, I almost want to call them disciples, right? It was kind of like that kind of a vibe. And we all started playing together, and just that infectious interest in the music and all of that just kind of, it kind of spurred me forward. But when we're talking about like the spark, like what really gets me excited today, like, yes, music gets me excited. Yes, having the great privilege to make a living doing this is awesome, right? Mm-hmm. But what really gets me excited is when I see other musicians, whether they're music teachers, right? Whether they're hobbyists, have musical breakthroughs that they didn't believe they could possibly have. And when I see those moments happen, it takes a day where perhaps I'm feeling unmotivated or forgetting why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it just all of a sudden, it's like a brightness comes out of me where I'm like, that's right. That's what this is all about. This is what makes music so amazing, is the way it has such a profound effect on people, especially when they do something they thought they could never do. So that's my spark.
I'm glad you're sharing your spark, because one of the things that you said, I had this teacher and then he did this, and then I got another teacher, and that was sort of my starting point. And it just goes to show you that music teachers can change lives. They impact people. I know my own teachers, some of them were like, okay. And others were like, oh my goodness, I can do this. And just sharing that you've kind of gone from experiencing that excellent level of teaching to now you becoming that excellent teacher. And, kudos to you for doing that, because it really is passionate, and it kind of gets that little, especially when they get it, right? When our students get it, we're like, okay, I've done my job and I've done it well. And I think when you look back at, you're an expert in the industry, What are you most enthusiastic about sharing with the music teachers community?
I mean, I'm excited to talk about how, especially when it comes to jazz, because I know that's why you have me on here today. I'm
Yes.
excited just to talk about how this style of music, it can have a profound effect on you and your musicianship and your understanding of music in general, but it can have a profound effect on your students as well. Whether, regardless of whether like jazz is of a primary interest or it's an ambition to play jazz at a high level, that's what I think is really powerful about, really any kind of style of music is going to give you something that you can't get from somewhere else. But there is a reason why classical music and jazz is taught in colleges, right? And is because there's so much musical depth within them that we can grab and we can pull, and suddenly our pop playing is so much better. Suddenly our folk playing is so much better. Our rock playing is so much better.
Yeah.
So I'm just excited to share how we do that, the way we think about that. How do we make a kind of music that a lot of people would say jazz is a complicated or advanced style of music, which I believe there are some limiting beliefs inside of that. But regardless, that's kind of the feeling. Yeah. How do we make that simple? How do we make that more achievable? And that's literally what I love doing, essentially, coaching people in that realm.
And you obviously doing it very well because you're so successful at it. And so congratulations again on that. It's incredible, Brent. And, you mentioned a unique approach when it comes to teaching and emphasizing frameworks and mindsets. Can you share a tip or some wisdom on how these tools can help musicians see better results in their practice sessions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a great example to talk about this is, first of all, a lot of folks, our students, right? When they start trying to learn how to play music, and it doesn't matter what level they're at, whether it's like the first time they're picking up an instrument or whether like they're in, some like intermediate music theory class. The problem with music in general is that it's a huge topic and it's a journey that never ends, right? And there's so many different things that you can accomplish. And in the day and age of YouTube, where you can get onto YouTube and search anything that you want, music or otherwise, and start getting instruction on that, you are barraged with millions of different things that you can be doing, and you can easily get distracted. And the most important thing to me when we're talking about learning how to play jazz or any style of music or getting better at music theory or getting better at improvisation is simplification, right? How do we make the complex simple? And really, how do we become great, essentially project managers, right? So I'll give you an example. When people first join our membership that we have, and a lot of the folks that join our membership are hobbyists, but we also have music teachers that come join us over there. The first thing that they want to know is like, how do I get started playing a jazz song, right? And that's the first thing we help them do, right? Well, how do you go about doing that, right? So the first question could be like, how do I learn the melody of a jazz standard? Do I read it off of sheet music, right? You can, but in the jazz world, we often encourage people to learn not all of it by ear, but try to learn certain things by ear, like the melody.
Yeah.
So what's a framework that we can put in place for someone who has never learned how to play music by ear before, right? Which is a huge limitation for folks, especially coming from the classical world, because we do have a lot of people that come in from the classical world that are just like, wow, I can play any piece you put in front of me, but don't even ask me how to learn by ear. Well, we have to simplify. So we use a framework called the LIST process. Stands for LIST. It's an acronym. And we break it down like that. So the first step, for example, is listen. That's pretty obvious, right?
Yep.
But a lot of people try to learn music without having listened to it, right? Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
So we recommend to folks, okay, go ahead, make a Spotify playlist, make a YouTube playlist of the same song you're trying to learn. Because if you type into Spotify, Fly Me to the Moon, you're going to get 100 different versions of Fly Me to the Moon. Put that together, and that should be playing the whole month that you're trying to work on learning this song. That way it's seeping into your subconscious, right? Haven't even touched your instrument yet, by the way. The second step is I, which is internalize. That's where you go, okay, I really need to learn this melody. What's one song, one version of this song I should focus on primarily? Okay, let's say Frank Sinatra's version of Fly Me to the Moon.
Yeah.
Now what we're going to do is we're going to sit down as if we're practicing, but we don't have our instrument with us, by the way, still. And we're going to listen to just that version of the song and spend time with it as if it's a practice session, listening to how is Frank singing this? How does the melody go? What are the sounds that I'm hearing, right? That's internalization, right? The next step is S, stands for sing. Singing or vocalizing, could be humming, could be whistling, is kind of like getting this, it's essentially confirming that you've internalized what you're hearing, right? And so now you're able to vocalize what you're actually hearing, and you'll try to sing it along with the recording, like get to that point, right? And we're still practicing here. We don't have an instrument, we're still practicing. And the last step is T, transfer. That's when we actually transfer to our instrument. And now we only have really just, it's so much easier to learn it on our instrument now by ear because we can already hear it in our head. We can sing it. Now we just need to plop on the recording again and just go and just quickly trial and error, figure out the notes, which is going to go so much faster. And suddenly you've learned something by ear. And so many of our students go through this it's a 30-day process of learning a song, this just being one small part of it. And at the end of it go, wow, I've never learned a melody by ear. I've never learned chords before like that. Yeah. I've never learned part of a jazz solo by ear like that before. I never thought, right? Just 30 days, right? And that's more. So I share all of that, not to necessarily teach you that framework, although I hope that you found that valuable. But it's just an example of how we use frameworks to help simplify the process. Another thing that we really do, and is a huge, huge focus for how we teach music, is batching, right? So again, this goes down to the overwhelm kind of process of learning music. So perhaps you set a goal, which is an important thing to do, but even better than that, creating a project that helps you get to that goal, right? So for example, let's just say we have some audacious goal. That is, I want to play at a public jazz jam session and not feel afraid and know the songs. That's a big goal for a lot of our members who come in. Yeah. They want to do that. Like they know they have a local jam and nearby them, and they're just too intimidated to do it. They don't know the songs. So that's a big goal. Awesome. You got that. How do you get to that goal? Well, you probably should go to the jam session first, see what songs are being called. Okay, write those down, write those down, write those down. Okay, now you got 10 songs. Okay, so we need to learn these 10 songs. Okay, let's back up and say, what's our first project? It's learning one song. Awesome, we learn one song. Now, how do we learn one song? Well, we learned the melody, and we just learned the list process for learning a melody. Okay, then we can break it up. There's chords. We probably want to practice a little bit of improvisation. Maybe we'll uncover a few other musical deficiencies in the process of doing that, and we'll want to work on those a little bit. But we want to batch that together. So for example, if I wanted to learn the melody of a jazz standard by ear, sure, we go through the list process, but then let's break it up. Let's say you only have 30 minutes to practice in a day, which is the case for a lot of people, right? How can you improve in 30 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, what if you just learned 4 or 8 bars of a melody by ear? Wouldn't that be a good day's work, right? And what if the next practice session, you learned the next 4 to 8 bars, and then the next practice session, you reviewed the last 4 to 8 bars? So all of this is really built in to the way we approach teaching music, so that it becomes manageable, so that people are learning, so that people aren't strangled really by this limiting belief that they have to practice for thousands of hours in order to actually improve, right? You can improve if you're working on the right things, if you're working on things efficiently, and you're focusing on the Pareto principle, right? The 80-20 rule, right? Talking about what's the 20% that's giving us most of the results, for those who are familiar with that. And that's kind of the heart of when I'm talking about frameworks. Did that answer the question, or did I go on a tangent there?
Yeah, no, I love that. And, I wish that I would have had your framework and the list system, because I remember always wanting to play in a jazz band. And in fact, I had my keyboard. I was standing at the back of a rehearsal hall, and I didn't know all of the lessons that you just gave us. And they were auditioning keyboard players for this jazz band. And I heard the musicians playing, and I had that immediate imposter syndrome saying, there's no way I can do this. And so I didn't even, even though I was on the list to audition, I just couldn't do it because I didn't have the confidence. And to be honest, I didn't have the skill set. But that's why it's so great that you're offering this opportunity to musicians and to teachers to embrace something new. And I think in the digital era, it's really shifted a lot in the music world. You can now collaborate with musicians from around the world. And as you said, there's a lot on platforms such as YouTube, and it's really affected the way that people learn music. So how do you utilize these platforms as you reach out to your potential students?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, there's like a couple sides to that, right? Like there's the side of educating, and then there's the business side where like obviously content marketing is important to,
Yes.
Have our potential students know, like, and trust us, right? And so that they're
Yes.
more interested, and we find the folks that are willing to take the next step with us, that want to really dive deeper into their playing, right? Because the way I think about like YouTube videos we put out, or podcast episodes are a little bit more meaty. And I like podcasts a lot. I'm biased.
Yes.
We've done 439 episodes now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. And so, oftentimes these are bite-sized chunks of information. This is awesome, by the way. I'm not trying to say that like YouTube is not great, that there's so much free information out there. I think it's amazing. I mean, what an opportunity we have today on music, or just about anything, to really access so much knowledge. But again, as we talked about before, the danger of that is this sense of overwhelm. Yeah. Sometimes this false sense of accomplishment where we're, checking out a YouTube video today and we spend like 30 minutes working on this random concept that someone taught. And then the next day we're checking out another one and we spend 30 minutes on another random that has nothing to do with the one you were just doing. And then a year passes and you realize I'm not really that much better than I was a year ago, right?
Exactly. Yep. 100%.
And so there's danger and there's great opportunity in it. I mean, the way I treat our YouTube videos is, how can I give something, like just something simple that you can just take away, like one thing you can take away from watching this video or listening to this podcast episode. And then of course, I'm always thinking, how can I tie this in to help you with what I know is going to help you a lot more, which is, the kinds of other programs that we have available to actually help you get the frameworks we're talking about, get community support, and all the things that we know goes into actually teaching as music teachers, right? That the things that are really the guidance, all of that we know is truly the most effective.
Yeah. And one of the things you said, Brent, really resonated with me. And that is, YouTube is a great resource for us to search for what we're interested in. But I remember many years ago, I had a marketing coach, and I was actually so excited that I was on YouTube, and I reached out to like 4 or 5 different marketing people. And one of them was local here in my hometown. And she came over and I said to her, "Oh, guess what I learned from so-and-so about marketing? And guess what else I learned from so-and-so?" And then there was just this uncomfortable silence. And she said to me, "Glory, how many teachers do your students have?" And I was taken aback and I said, "What do you mean? They just have one. It's me." And then I was kind of getting what she was talking about. She said, "Exactly." She said, "You can go and be like a squirrel with all these ideas and you think everyone is better than the other person. But when they come and they want to learn jazz, then invest in the program and stay on track, because yes, there's always going to be someone who does it differently. But I think the really important thing, and I'm a business coach, as are you, that I'm always saying you have to trust the process. And I do have coaches in my professional development as well. And you have to trust that your coach has got your best interest. And that's why you, as a music teacher, need to realize that you also need to learn from one person, because that's what's going to get you there a lot faster. And I know we were talking a little bit about your podcast. And when we look back at your podcast, and oh my God, over 400 episodes, how has your podcast played a role in building and nurturing your community? And do you feel it's an essential tool for educators as well?
I think it's a great tool for educators. And I mentioned, I'm like a little bit biased towards podcasts. Because one thing that, and I know all the music teachers will agree with me here, like one thing that can be frustrating about the era of like TikTok and Instagram Reels, and even like YouTube, shorter form content, is, there's only so much you can give. There's only so much you can really say. And there's only so much about, like, that you're giving them the candy bar and not the actual gourmet meal. That's kind of how you feel when it's actually going on. Yet it's so essential in this modern day and age of teaching and spreading influence and such. But a podcast is awesome. I like doing podcasting because I just like the medium. I like listening to podcasts personally. Yeah. But you can kind of deep dive with somebody a little bit more. You can get to know them as a teacher, kind of like you're talking about. Like, you can follow one person quite far, even just listening to a podcast. And so, you get this sense that, and I've heard from my listeners that they have this deeper sense of an intimate connection with me, even though they've never actually, it's sort of a one-way conversation. Yeah. And I think that's so cool, right? You're able to impact people that way. And ultimately, my most die-hard students, right? You ask them, like, that they listen to the podcast. And that's because they've gotten lots of opportunity to hear the way you teach, to hear the way you coach, to hear the way you think about music and your ideas and your personality. And so, when you get tied in to someone like that a little bit deeper, you're actually more likely to take action, right? Going back to what you were saying just a second ago, right? Because you develop a relationship with someone, you're more likely just to be like, yeah, I'm actually going to try doing this, not just listen to this podcast today. After I'm done listening to the podcast, I'm actually going to try this. I'm actually going to take some action on it. So, I think it's great. I love podcasts.
Yeah, me too. And I appreciate what you said, because I think one of my key takeaways, my middle name is implementation. And I always feel when you have an opportunity to learn and you kind of sit back and don't do anything, you're missing an opportunity to grow as a person, as an educator. And that's why it's so important to follow through and take the lessons, what you've learned, and say, you know what? This is something that I want to do. And I know with the world of TikTok and shorts and all of that, I think it's great for snacking, scrolling and doing that. And it's entertaining and you don't have to think a whole lot. But at the end of the day, I love putting on a podcast, as do you, and just really listening and getting to know someone, because it's such a free conversation and it really lights me up. And then, I'm impacted by the guest and say, you know what, I am going to try that. So I think it's really cool. And I think there's every successful individual has also had influences along their journey, as I was sharing a little bit of mine with you. But so you mentioned before we went live about Justin Nielsen and how his teachings kind of set the foundation for your career in jazz. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you said something at the beginning of the podcast too about this, and about like how different teachers along the way kind of move you in a certain direction and have an impact. Before I talk about him, who was probably the biggest influence on me, I mentioned before my first guitar teacher that ran away, that all of a sudden he just disappeared. Despite that side of it, that teacher had such a profound effect on me as well, just because that was the first time I was learning how to play an instrument, right? Yeah. And I took to it so much. And I think a lot of teachers, especially when they're teaching like kids, I think it was like 11 or something, or 12, I don't know, something like that. When a kid actually practices, right, and they follow through and come back the next lesson, they actually did the thing, like their eyes light up a little bit, like the dullness in their eyes just suddenly bright light up a little bit, right? I know that because I used to be that guy too, the teacher teaching the students like that. And so, he really encouraged me a lot because he saw, oh, wow, this kid really likes it. This is really awesome, right? And so he would teach me more things. He would move me onto songs a little fast. He would, he really started like, embracing what I was trying to do. And so that has an impact, right? So I think it's something as music teachers, we all have to think about is like, what role am I playing here in this person's life today? And that'll be different depending on you're still the same you, right? Yeah. But different people are on different parts of their musical journey or even their life journey. And so what moment you're meeting them in is important to be aware of, right? Because maybe what they need right now is not to perfect their major scale or they're not to master this technique. It's to point them in the direction or give them the motivation or whatever gap they need to fill at this moment. Yeah. So, teachers like that came, and sometimes I would take a one-off lesson from someone, even just, this is going past Justin Nielsen, who I'll talk about in a second, but one of my favorite jazz guitarists of all time, who I just started becoming obsessed with, at the end of my high school years and into college. His name's Peter Bernstein, a great, world-class jazz guitarist based here out of New York City. And the first time I came to New York, I was checking out some music schools to come out to. And so I booked a lesson with him, and it was just one lesson. Yeah. But just doing that, because this is a guy, I've listened to his records all the time. There's the very sheer fact that I was going to be sitting in the same room as this person was just, mind blowing to me. Like, it was just, I can't believe it. This is like the best day of my life. And, I don't remember anything that he taught me in that lesson. I do remember us playing together, but what I do remember is coming away from that and going, wow, I want to be a jazz guitarist even more than I did before. Right. And just that fuel. So going back to the role you play, right, in someone's musical life. Justin Nielsen. So this was a guy, I grew up in Boise, Idaho. Mm-hmm. And there's musicians around there, great musicians, all that stuff, but a little bit of a desert when it comes to jazz. And I became, very into jazz. And one of my friends who I played in a rock band with, he introduced me to him. He said, I'm starting to take some lessons from this amazing pianist. He also has like this little tribe of students, and they do like jam sessions and they perform together. And he's starting this like, cultish like art school, which he did. It's not cultish. I guess that's a little bit weird to say. It was totally normal. And so he introduced me to him, and I went to his not cultish art school the next year that he had brand new started. And, that was it. It was amazing because it was the first time where someone was just like, so all the students around him were just like, he was the nicest guy, first of all, great person, very kind, compassionate, the kind of person you would want to have as a music teacher, honestly. But at the same time, so serious about, hey, practicing, like we're all, listen to the records. Let's do like this ambiance that he brought, this culture that he brought around him, inspired so many of the students around and got us all excited. And so before you know it, we're all playing together. His students are playing together. We're playing at jam sessions. We're doing all these things. And that year I met him was like an impactful moment. He was having me learn songs that were way too hard for me, but that was a good thing. And he's like, you're going to perform at this jazz festival. I'm like, I am. He's like, yes, you are. You're going to compete in this jazz festival. I'm like, okay, all right, let's do it. And so that was a huge moment. And then that was my senior year of high school. And it was kind of like that year where I was like, I want to be a jazz musician. This is what I want to do with my life. But I was a little bit financially at the moment. I was having a hard time. All the music schools I wanted to go to, it's like, these are too expensive for me to go to. And it was really stressful. And I was getting into the schools, but I wasn't getting massive scholarships or anything. So my teacher, Justin, he suggested, hey, Brent, this might sound a little unorthodox and whatever, but what would you think about just staying back a year? Don't go to college right away, like everybody's saying to, and just study with me. Like we'll do a program together for a full year. You'll do your gigs a couple times a week, and so that's what I did. I stayed back for a year, and the program was fairly intense to say the least. I learned 100 jazz standards in 1 year. I transcribed 32 bars of a jazz solo every single week.
Oh my God.
Was gigging, was teaching students, making some money, saving up for that college and doing all that stuff. Yeah, that's what I did. And just working with him and meeting with him every single week, that's sort of what propelled me forward. And yeah, so he had a huge impact on me.
Wow. And when we think even just saying it out loud, 100 new jazz standards, like that's a lot of practicing.
Yes.
That's obsessive. I
was practicing probably 5 to 8 hours a day at that period of time. But that's also because that was like, what else was I going to do with my life at that time? It was kind of the moment, Right.
Well, it's interesting. My husband, he's a professional entertainer, and he traveled with Lenny Breau, who was one of the jazz guitar greats. And they became best friends. And then he married my sister-in-law. So Lenny Breau became my brother-in-law.
Wow.
And Lenny Breau, when they were touring together, Ray often said, oh, he would sleep with his guitar, but he was obsessive, just like you. And he would be practicing for like 8 hours a day and doing things that were almost impossible to do. But he just had that passion. And Ray said, gee, if I would have like paid attention, I could have had free jazz lessons, but I was too busy playing pool and whatever else goes on after a gig. But I think that, on the topic of practicing 5 to 8 hours a day, how did you keep yourself motivated, like, and not burn out, saying like, okay, I've had enough. This is exhausting.
Well, I mean, first of all, I did burn out.
Oh, you did.
So that did happen a little bit, but at the same time, again, it was a moment of my life of just, I had a goal, and it was the time, and I had that motivation, right? And again, important to how I teach today is I had projects, right? It was very clear what I needed to do. Mm-hmm. And I learned because of these ambitious projects that I had to accomplish. I created my own systems, right? Mm-hmm. For how do I go about transcribing 32 bars of a jazz solo every single week, right? That's a lot, right?
That's a lot.
And essentially learning, if you do the math, 3 new songs a week, right? So how do you go about actually doing that? And so when you get that goal-oriented and that focused, and not to mention, I just naturally have a lot of self-motivation. Not everybody has that, but I'm blessed with that. It keeps you going forward. Do I practice like that today? Absolutely not. Not even close, especially with a 19-month-old daughter and a wife, a family, and a online business. But, it's funny because yes, that was an important year of my life. And after that, years after that, I practiced quite a bit as well. But it's really the opposite of what I encourage my students to do. Now I almost encourage them to go, don't even try to find more time to practice than you already currently have now.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you do that, well, first of all, you start disappointing yourself, because then you start failing, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're like, oh, whoops, I didn't make enough time to practice today. Whoops, right. I said I was going to practice on this day, but I didn't because a life thing came up. And so I like to just come from the place of, like, again, what I talked about earlier, how do we 80-20 this thing? How do we really make the maximum amount out of like the limited time that we have to practice? Mm-hmm. That being said, did I learn a lot going through that process, practicing that much, learning all those songs?
Yeah.
Of course I did, right? A lot of trial and error, a lot of guts and glory kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible. Your journey's incredible. And I think in order to, be the successful business person that you are today, you have experienced all aspects of what you're helping your students learn. And sometimes I find that that's the most successful entrepreneur, is that you've lived it, you've been on this journey, and now you know how to help others on their journey as well to becoming successful musicians without burnout, right? Without feeling guilty or giving up, as oftentimes they do. So question for you, Brent, if you had to pick one song that sort of put together your entire journey as a musician, what song would that be and why?
Well, that's a tough question. There's one song that I just would always play, because for a period of my life, I made most of my living off of performing and teaching private lessons. So during that period of time, I played a lot of gigs. And I always loved playing this jazz standard called "I'll Be Seeing You."
Oh, yeah.
It's such a beautiful melody.
Yeah.
And the harmony is right. And it just kind of like hits me the right way. Like the chords hit me the right way.
Yeah.
And I just always loved playing that song. And so, I don't know. It just kind of, I remember the first time I really got into the song, I was sitting in a jazz club underground, which are the best ways. By the way, the best way to consume jazz is in a dark underground cellar that smells like stale booze and sometimes has a pole obstructing your view, but that's okay because everything else about the environment, and it's small. It can't be too big either. It has to be kind of small.
Yep.
So I was sitting in one of those. I was sitting in one of those jazz clubs listening, and this jazz musician, more of a modern jazz player, called that song, and it was a little bit of a twist they're playing a stand where they're playing a lot of original music up into that moment. And then they played that song and it just sort of like went, whoa, you can play a jazz standard like that? Wow, these guys really did study this music. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so I think that just like lit me up, and yeah, we'll call that my song. Although if you asked me on a different day, I wonder if I'd say something else. I don't know.
Well, you really have me laughing because I totally, my daughter Sherry played at a club called Pianos in New York, and I remember her telling me when she went to that basement club that you're talking about with a pole obstruction in the middle, and I think Chick Corea and a bunch of other jazz players just happened to all be there, and she has a treble clef on her, a tattoo on her arm, and she was right in front of the stage because she's obsessed with this music. And what's interesting about that is that musicians know, like they can look at you and they know you're a player. And he looked at her and did the nod as you know, musicians do, meaning you want to sit in? And she's like, sure. And here's the thing, that if you really are a player, you have to know jazz music theory. And he literally, and she was sharing the story with me, and she said he just put up two fingers, meaning two sharps, you know, if two fingers down, B flat. So that, and she got to sit in, and she said it was life-changing for her. But she said same thing as you. It was like dark. It was, there was that many people in there, but it was the musicians that came together to play. And I think that really lights them up. That's when you know you're so passionate. You just want to sit in and play with jam with some really amazing players and have a lot of fun.
Right.
And, you know, it's so cool that you had a chance to do all that. And I mean, you're still in New York, right?
Yeah, I still live in the area. Yeah, still in the area.
Still hanging out. So if you're stranded on a desert island, you're going to have one jazz instrument that you can play. Which one are you going to pick?
Now, would that, okay.
You're going to go for, what are you going to go for? You're going to go for guitar? You're going to go for piano? What instrument?
That is a really interesting question. Okay, because like obviously the more obvious answer would be like guitar, because that's my primary, that's my instrument, that's what I play, right? So I can already play that pretty well. So my gut is going like, probably I should just take that guitar with me. But then on the other hand, I've always had this thing where I'm like, you know, if I were to just start all over, what would I play? I feel like I would, I want to be the upright bass player. I want to be an upright bass player. Like I just love the role. Like whenever I played in bands and like my bass player buddies back there, I just kind of look back at them, you know, they're always so serious too. What's going on? But they're just kind of like, you know, in some kind of trance, just like, and you're like, wow, that sounds like a lot of fun, right?
Yeah.
And you know, it's a hard job. Like it's a hard job, but at the same time, it's, you know, there's this ability to. I feel like with guitars and piano, you have to, what voicings do we play? We have to be able to play the melody, and we have to be able to do all this. And it's not that the bass players don't have extraordinary responsibility in a band of any kind, but it's that focus of like, I want to just focus on playing my bass lines really well, and then improvising. But like, just I'm gonna become, that would just be amazing. And also, it's a nice big instrument, and you can go up high there, and then you can go down low, and I don't know. And it's also, it's earthy, right? It's like, it just feels like it's part of your body, like you're playing it.
It does. Yeah, I love bass. Ray always tells this story of when he had his bass player, but Ray had a little car and they were going to the gig, and his bass player didn't even own a car. So they used to have to strap it to the top of the car.
Oh my gosh.
In order to get to the gig. It was hilarious, but you do what you have to do, right?
Yeah. So, well, there's this thing like in New York City, right?
Yeah.
Like not everybody's driving cars around. I mean, it does not quite, especially a lot of the gigs are in Manhattan or Brooklyn or wherever. And so it's not really, you know, you're carrying your instrument on the subway, right? Yeah. And you know, I was complaining because I got my backpack guitar on and I'm holding my amp in front of me. And like, this is the worst part of the gig. Meanwhile, you got the bass players with the drummers are the worst because like they literally have like a cart contraption, and sometimes their bass drum fits, you know, the smaller drums inside of it, and it's all stacked on top. And then, you know, so, you know, you always have to feel for them.
Absolutely. I don't, and I'm glad you're sharing these stories, because sometimes I think audiences don't even realize the incredible dedication that musicians have not only in their hours and hours of practice, but just, schlepping their gear from one gig to another. I'm a schlepper, but
and you don't usually get paid for that too. It's not usually
true.
in the.
Yeah.
So,
what do you get paid for? Not practicing, not researching gigs or how to get and all of this stuff. So they're down to about, 50 cents an hour, but they're changing the world with their music, and they bring so much joy to the audience, and it's really amazing. So it's just been a pleasure having you on the show, Brett. It's just I just
Glory.
have a big smile on my face here. How can people connect with you and learn more about your program?
You just go check out learnjazzstandards.com. Learnjazzstandards.com is my website. Also, if you're a podcast fan, which you might be because you're listening to this one, we have a podcast called the Learn Jazz Standards Podcast, and there's around 430, is it 440, something like that now, episodes of pretty much just about everything possibly you would need to ever know on jazz. So if that interests you, you might find that entertaining. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'll be sure to share the links in the show notes as well. And as I said, Brent, it's been an absolute pleasure diving into your world of jazz and understanding the magic behind learnjazzstandards.com. Your passion and dedication in the art is really inspiring to me. It makes me say, you know what, Gloria, it's not too late. Maybe you could go learn a little jazz. It'd be kind of fun. Now that you've told me I don't have to practice 8 hours a day, I think it'll be awesome. So thanks for sharing your journey, your wisdom, and a few laughs with us today. I really appreciate you.
Thanks, Gloria. Really appreciate you having me on.
And to our listeners out there, remember to stay tuned for more incredible episodes of the Ultimate Music Teachers Podcast. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, comment, share, and join our Ultimate Music Teachers community. So till next time, keep the music playing. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Ultimate Music Teachers Productivity and Profitability Podcast. Together, we can transform lives through the power of music education. I invite you to explore what's possible for your musical journey inside our UMT community. Simply join our Ultimate Music Teachers private Facebook group, where we network, answer questions, host live events, and connect on a deeper level. Here's to your ultimate music teaching success with productivity and profitability. Till next time, teach with passion.